In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rose and fell like waves against cosmic shores, there existed a simple truth that had governed warfare for millennia. The strongest warrior wins. The Caliph Empire had built their dominion on this principle, their genetically enhanced champions carving through star systems like gods of war. Each champion could level cities, their bioengineered bodies capable of feats that defied physics itself. Then came humanity, not with warriors who could shatter mountains or beings who could manipulate matter with their minds. They came with something far more dangerous to an empire built on the worship of individual strength. They came with engineers who refused to accept that anything was impossible, mechanics who saw every problem as just another puzzle to solve, and an unshakable belief that there was always a better way. The Empire had faced rebels before. They had crushed species that possessed psychic abilities, defeated races with natural armor that could deflect plasma fire, and broken civilizations that had mastered technologies the Empire couldn't even comprehend. But they had never faced a species that looked at their unstoppable champions and asked, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" This is the story of the war that changed everything. Not because it was won by superior firepower or advanced technology, but because sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is someone with a wrench, a stubborn streak, and the absolute refusal to be impressed by anyone calling themselves a god. The bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought, Eternal Glory, hummed with the quiet efficiency of a machine built to conquer worlds. Admiral Zephyros stood before the massive viewing screen, his four arms clasped behind his back as he watched the blue-green planet slowly rotating below. Earth, the humans called it. Such a simple name for what would soon become another jewel in the Empire's crown. "Status report," Zephyros commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been refused. "All champions are prepared for deployment, Admiral," replied Captain Vex, her scaled skin shimmering under the bridge's lights. "Champion Karath has already begun his descent to the planet's surface. The humans' largest military installation should be nothing more than rubble within the hour." Zephyros nodded approvingly. The Caliph Empire had perfected the art of conquest over 3,000 years. Why waste resources on lengthy sieges when a single champion could accomplish what entire fleets once required? Each champion was a masterpiece of bioengineering and genetic enhancement, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space, generating personal shield fields, and wielding enough raw power to level mountains. They were living weapons, revered as gods by the countless species that had learned to kneel before the Empire's might. The humans' military response has been interesting, Captain Vex continued, consulting her tactical display. They've mobilized their primitive aircraft and ground forces, but they seem to be approaching Champion Karatha's position with unusual equipment. Equipment. Zephyros turned from the viewing screen, his golden eyes narrowing. "What kind of equipment?" "Engineering vehicles, Admiral. Construction mechs, repair platforms, and what appears to be a significant number of maintenance personnel." Zephyros felt a flutter of confusion. In 3 millennia of conquest, no species had ever responded to a champion deployment by sending mechanics. It was like responding to a natural disaster by bringing accountants. Are they attempting some kind of last-minute infrastructure project? "Unknown, sir. But they've established a perimeter approximately 2 kilometers from Champion Karatha's landing site and appear to be building something. On the surface of Earth, Master Chief Engineer Sarah Chun wiped sweat from her brow as she surveyed the organized chaos surrounding her. 300 of the finest engineers, mechanics, and technicians from 12 different nations have been hastily assembled and transported to this remote stretch of Nevada desert. Around her, a small city of equipment sprawled across the sand. Mobile workshops, 3D fabrication units, quantum computers, sensor arrays, and enough diagnostic equipment to strip down and rebuild a space station. "Status report," she called out, her voice carrying over the sound of machinery and shouted orders. "We've got full spectrum analysis running on the bogey," replied Dr. James Patterson, not looking up from his array of monitors. The theoretical physicist had been pulled from a sabbatical at MIT and still wore the confused expression of someone trying to process the impossible. Whatever this thing is, it's throwing off energy signatures we've never seen before. The readings are, well, they're insane. Define insane, Chun said, moving to look over his shoulder. It's generating a localized gravitational field that should collapse into a black hole, but doesn't. It's producing electromagnetic radiation across 17 spectrums we didn't know existed. And, according to these readings, it's somehow maintaining a personal atmosphere with a pressure differential that violates about 6 different laws of thermodynamics. Shin nodded, as if this made perfect sense. So it's running on exotic physics. Question is, are those physics natural to the creature, or is it dependent on some kind of technology? You're assuming it's artificial? Asked Colonel Martinez, the military liaison who had been assigned to make sure the engineers didn't accidentally blow up the state of Nevada. Everything's artificial if you dig deep enough, Chen replied. The question is whether we can figure out how it works before it figures out how to kill us all. A new voice crackled through their communication system. Folks, you might want to see this, came the voice of Captain Rodriguez, who was piloting one of the reconnaissance drones, maintaining a safe distance from the alien creature. The big guy's moving. Champion Karath strode across the desert with the confidence of a being that had never encountered an obstacle it couldn't overcome. Standing 12 feet tall, his bio-enhanced form rippled with muscles that could punch through starship hull plating. His skin was a deep metallic blue, crossed with veins that pulsed with energy, and his 4 eyes swept the horizon with predatory awareness. Behind him, a crater marked where his pod had impacted the Earth, the ground still glowing with residual heat from his arrival. He had done this dance countless times before. Land, demonstrate overwhelming power, wait for the local military to attempt their futile resistance, crush their forces with contemptuous ease, then wait for the survivors to surrender. It was almost boring in its predictability. The human's response, however, was unlike anything in his experience. Instead of armies marching to meet him, instead of desperate last stands and heroic charges, he was being approached by what appeared to be a convoy of maintenance vehicles. Karath paused, his enhanced senses analyzing the approaching vehicles. No weapon signatures, no energy shielding. No genetic enhancement markers among the occupants, just mechanics. He had seen more threatening opposition from aggressive wildlife on backwater planets. Perhaps the humans were more primitive than the Empire's scouts had reported. Perhaps they truly didn't understand what they were facing. It would almost be a mercy to end this quickly. But, as Champion Karath resumed his advance, he failed to notice the careful positioning of the human vehicles. He didn't register the significance of the sensor arrays being deployed around his path. And he certainly didn't understand the importance of the heated discussion taking place among the engineers who were watching his every move. Look at the gate pattern, Chen was saying, studying the real-time analysis streaming in from dozens of sensors. See how the left leg compensates for that slight energy fluctuation in the right hip joint. There's a recurring micro-delay every 7th step. I see it, Dr. Patterson confirmed. And look at this energy reading. The power output isn't constant. There's a cyclic pattern, like a heartbeat, but with irregular intervals. Irregular how? Like something that's trying to maintain synchronization, but struggling with the local conditions. The gravitational field fluctuates every time it encounters certain mineral deposits in the ground. Chen's eyes lit up with the expression every engineer gets when they spot a problem they know they can solve. It's having compatibility issues. Come again. This thing, whatever it is, it wasn't designed to operate in Earth's environment. Look at these atmospheric readings. Every time it breathes, there's a micro-adjustment in its internal chemistry. It's running some kind of adaptive protocol, trying to compensate for the local conditions. Colonel Martinez leaned in closer. Are you saying this thing has weaknesses? I'm saying everything has weaknesses, Chen replied. Even the most sophisticated system is only as strong as its least robust component. The question is finding the right leverage point. Ma'am, called out Sergeant Shun, no relation, from the communication station. We're getting reports from around the globe. Similar creatures have landed near major population centers on every continent. Military forces worldwide are reporting the same thing. Conventional weapons are having no effect. Expected, Chun said dismissively. You don't build a system like this without basic kinetic and energy shielding. But every shield has to have power regulation, and every power system has to have heat management, and every complex system has to have some way to handle unexpected inputs. She turned to address the entire team, raising her voice over the controlled chaos of the operation. Listen up, people. We're looking at a technology we don't understand, but that doesn't mean we can't figure it out. Every machine can be understood, every system can be analyzed, and every problem can be solved. We've got the finest collection of troubleshooters on the planet, and our job is to treat this like the ultimate diagnostic challenge. And if we can't, asked Dr. Peterson, a software engineer who had been frantically trying to decode the electromagnetic patterns emanating from the creature. Then, we learned something new, Chun said with a grin that had become legendary in engineering circles across 3 continents. But I've been fixing impossible things for 20 years, and I'm not about to let some oversized alien tourist attraction break my streak. Champion Karath had stopped advancing. His enhanced hearing had detected something that made his predatory instincts flare with alarm. The humans weren't panicking. Despite facing a being capable of wiping out their entire species, despite watching their weapons fail against his shields, despite witnessing demonstrations of power that should have sent them fleeing in terror, they were talking. Calmly, analytically, like mechanics discussing a malfunctioning engine. For the first time in his 300-year career as a champion of the Empire, Karath felt a sensation he had forgotten existed. Uncertainty. Admiral. Captain Vex's voice carried a note of confusion as she addressed Zephyros on the bridge of the Eternal Glory. We're receiving some unusual telemetry from Champion Karath. Unusual how? His biometric readings show elevated stress indicators. His power consumption has increased by 12% in the last 10 minutes. And his tactical assessment protocols have been running continuous cycles, as if he's encountering some kind of unprecedented scenario. Zephyros frowned. Champions were designed to be unflappable. Their psychological conditioning made them virtually immune to fear, doubt, or confusion. The idea that Karath was experiencing stress was like reporting that space had suddenly become wet. What's the tactical situation on ground? That's what's unusual, Admiral. There is no tactical situation. The humans aren't engaging Champion Karath militarily. They've simply surrounded him with maintenance equipment and appear to be taking measurements. Measurements of what? Everything, sir. We're detecting active scans across 17 different spectrums. They're analyzing his power signature, his biorhythms, his gravitational field fluctuations, even the mineral content of his exhaled atmosphere. Zephyros felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine puzzlement. Are they attempting some kind of scientific study? Do they not understand they're at war? Unknown, Admiral. But their scanning intensity has increased exponentially in the last 20 minutes. Whatever they're looking for, they appear to believe they're close to finding it. Back on Earth's surface, Dr. Patterson was staring at his monitors with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a miracle. Sarah, you need to see this. Chun hurried over to the physicist's workstation, where streams of data were cascading across multiple screens. What am I looking at? The quantum signature analysis. Look at these patterns. Patterson highlighted a series of wavelengths that pulsed in complex rhythms. This isn't just exotic physics. This is engineered exotic physics. Someone built this creature using principles that require active maintenance. Meaning it's not naturally occurring. Every cell in that thing's body is being actively stabilized by some kind of technological framework. Take away the framework, and the entire biological system should collapse back into normal matter. Chun leaned closer, her engineer's mind racing through the implications. Where's the framework located? That's the beautiful part. It has to be centralized. You can't maintain this level of quantum coherence across a distributed system. There has to be a single point of control, probably somewhere in the torso, that's coordinating the entire biological matrix. Can we disrupt it? Maybe. But we need to understand the control protocols first. And we need to figure out how to access the system without triggering whatever defensive measures it might have. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data streams with the focused intensity of someone solving a particularly complex puzzle. Finally, she smiled. Dr. Patterson, has anyone ever told you that you think like an engineer? Is that good or bad? In this case, it's exactly what we need. She turned to address the team again. People, we've got ourselves a technical challenge. This creature isn't invincible. It's just very, very complicated. And the one thing we do better than anyone else in the universe is solve complicated problems. Champion Karath could feel something changing in the humans' approach. Their scanning had become more focused, more directed. Instead of the broad-spectrum analysis they had been conducting, their instruments were now targeting specific areas of his anatomy with surgical precision. He activated his internal communication systems to report to the fleet. Command, this is Champion Karath. I am experiencing an unusual tactical situation. Admiral Zephyros's voice crackled through the bio-integrated communicator. Define unusual, Champion. The human response is unlike any resistance I have encountered. They are not attempting to fight me, Admiral. They are attempting to understand me. There was a long pause before Zephyros responded. Champions are beyond understanding, Karath. You are living weapons, perfected by millennia of bioengineering. These primitives cannot possibly comprehend what you are. With respect, Admiral, they appear to be making significant progress. Another pause, longer this time. Proceed with the mission, Champion. Demonstrate imperial power and wait for their surrender. But as Karath prepared to make the traditional display of overwhelming force that had ended countless battles across the galaxy, he noticed something that made his enhanced nervous system flood with alarm signals. The humans were no longer just taking measurements. They were building something. And whatever it was, they were building it fast. The construction that had begun around Champion Karath defied every military doctrine the Empire had encountered in 3 millennia of conquest. Instead of fortifications designed to keep the champion out, the humans were building what appeared to be a sophisticated technical facility designed to bring him in. Prefabricated modules rose from the desert floor with mechanical precision, assembling themselves into a structure that looked less like a military installation and more like the world's largest diagnostic center. Status report. Master Chief Engineer Sarah Chun called out as she moved through the organized chaos of construction. Around her, teams of specialists worked with the focused intensity of people who knew they were racing against both time and the impossible. Primary analysis chamber is 60% complete, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a naval engineer who had been coordinating the structural assembly. We'll have full environmental containment within 2 hours. Power grid, online and stable. We've got enough juice to run a small city, plus backup systems for the backup systems. Shin nodded approvingly. When dealing with unknown technology, redundancy wasn't just good practice, it was survival. What about the scanning array? Dr. Patterson looked up from a cluster of quantum sensors that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. We've got real-time molecular analysis, quantum state monitoring, and biorhythmic tracking all running in parallel, plus some experimental equipment that the boys at CERN were saving for the next decade. Experimental how? Let's just say, if this doesn't work, we'll probably create a small tear in space-time. But if it does work, we'll have the most detailed analysis of exotic matter interaction ever attempted. I'll take those odds, Chun said without hesitation. What's our target status? Champion Karath had been watching the construction with growing unease. His enhanced senses could detect the purpose behind every component being assembled, and what he was seeing challenged every assumption he had about primitive species. The humans weren't building weapons or shields. They were building a laboratory specifically designed to study him. The structure rising around him was clearly intended to contain something with his exact specifications. The electromagnetic shielding was calibrated to his specific energy signature. The gravitational compensators were tuned to counteract his personal field effects. Even the atmosphere processors were configured for his unique biochemistry requirements. They hadn't just analyzed him. They had reverse-engineered a containment system based on their analysis. "Command," he spoke into his biointegrated communicator, "I believe the situation has escalated beyond standard conquest protocols." Admiral Zephyros's voice carried a note of growing irritation. "Explain, Champion." "The humans have constructed what appears to be a sophisticated research facility. The structure is clearly designed with my specific capabilities in mind." "Research facility?" There was a pause while Zephyros processed this information. "Champions are not subjects for study, Karath. You are instruments of Imperial will. Demonstrate that will." "Admiral, with respect, I believe these humans may pose a different kind of threat than we anticipated. There is no threat a champion cannot overcome. Proceed with pacification." But, as Karath prepared to follow his orders, he realized something that sent alarm signals cascading through his enhanced nervous system. The humans had positioned their facility in such a way that any display of his power would necessarily involve interacting with their equipment. They had made it impossible for him to demonstrate Imperial might without simultaneously providing them with detailed data about how his abilities functioned. They had turned his greatest weapons into diagnostic tools. "Ma'am," Sergeant Shin called out from the communications station, "we're getting reports from the other sites. Teams in Moscow, Beijing, London, and Sao Paulo are all reporting similar progress." The aliens seemed to be hesitating. Sarah Chun smiled grimly. "They're learning what every engineer knows. The moment you try to understand how something works, it stops being magic and starts being technology. And all technology can be improved, modified, or fixed. Or broken," added Dr. Patterson. "Sometimes fixing and breaking are the same thing," Chen replied. "Depends on your perspective." She turned to address the entire team, raising her voice over the sound of final assembly procedures. "Listen up, people. We're about to attempt something that's never been done before. We're going to invite an alien superweapon into our laboratory and politely ask it to submit to a complete technical evaluation. And if it says no, ask Colonel Martinez. Then we'll do what engineers have been doing since the first human picked up a rock and wondered how it worked," Chun said. "We'll figure out anyway." The invitation, when it came, was delivered through a combination of electromagnetic pulses, gravitational field modulations, and atmospheric chemical signals that Champion Karath's enhanced senses interpreted as a complex communication attempt. The humans were attempting to speak to him using the same exotic physics that governed his own existence. The message, once decoded, was simple and utterly unprecedented in his experience. "We would like to understand how you work. Will you help us?" Never, in 300 years as a champion of the Empire, had anyone asked him for cooperation. Species typically responded to his presence with terror, desperate resistance, or immediate surrender. They begged for mercy, threatened impossible revenge, or offered tribute in exchange for their lives. None had ever politely requested a technical consultation. "Command," he spoke into his communicator, "the humans are attempting diplomatic contact." "Impossible," Admiral Zephyros replied immediately. "Champions do not engage in diplomacy. You are weapons of conquest, not ambassadors. They are requesting technical cooperation, Admiral." "Requesting what?" "They want to understand how I function. They have constructed a facility specifically designed for that purpose and are asking for my voluntary participation." The silence that followed lasted so long that Karath began to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, Admiral Zephyros's voice returned, carrying a note of complete bewilderment. "They want to study you? Voluntarily?" "That appears to be correct, Admiral." "Have they made any threats? Issued any demands?" "No," admitted. "They have simply asked politely." Another long pause. "Champion Karath, in 3,000 years of Imperial expansion, no species has ever requested permission to study our champions. I'm aware of that, Admiral. What is your tactical assessment? Korath considered the question carefully. His enhanced analytical capabilities were designed to evaluate military threats, assess enemy capabilities, and calculate optimal combat strategies. They were not designed to process a situation where potential enemies were asking for his help with a research project. I have no tactical framework for this scenario, Admiral. On the bridge of the eternal glory, Admiral Zephyros found himself facing a command decision unlike any in his long career. The Empire's entire conquest strategy was built on the overwhelming superiority of their champions. The bioengineered warriors were living demonstrations of imperial power, designed to inspire terror and immediate submission in any species that encountered them. The idea that a species might respond to a champion with scientific curiosity rather than fear was so far outside established doctrine that there were no protocols to follow. Admiral, Captain Vex approached with a data pad. We're receiving similar reports from the other champions. The humans at each landing site have constructed research facilities and are requesting voluntary cooperation with technical analysis. All of them? Yes, sir. According to the champions' reports, the human response appears to be globally coordinated. They've built identical facilities at each site within a matter of hours. Zephyros studied the tactical display showing the positions of all 12 champions deployed to Earth's surface. Each was surrounded by sophisticated human-built structures that bore no resemblance to any military installation in Imperial records. What are our strategic options, Captain? Unknown, Admiral. Our conquest protocols assume that target species will attempt to fight the champions or surrender to them. We have no procedures for a species that wants to conduct collaborative research. Can the champions simply refuse? They could, sir, but the humans have constructed their facilities in such a way that any demonstration of champion abilities will automatically provide them with detailed analytical data. The champions cannot effectively display imperial power without simultaneously advancing human understanding of their capabilities. Admiral Zephyros realized he was facing something that the Empire's vast military machine had never encountered, an enemy that wanted to help them understand the conflict. Back on Earth's surface, Champion Korath made a decision that would have been impossible for any previous generation of Imperial warrior. Driven by curiosity about beings who treated the impossible as merely improbable, he walked toward the human facility. The structure opened to receive him like a flower blooming in reverse, its walls retracting to reveal a chamber that had been designed with meticulous attention to his specific requirements. The atmosphere was perfectly calibrated to his biochemistry. The gravitational field was precisely tuned to complement his personal field effects, and the electromagnetic environment was optimized to avoid interference with his enhanced nervous system. "Welcome," said Sarah Chun, speaking through a communication system that translated her words into the harmonic frequencies that Korath's enhanced hearing processed most efficiently. "Thank you for accepting our invitation." Korath paused at the threshold, his 4 eyes scanning the chamber with enhanced senses that could detect everything from molecular composition to quantum field fluctuations. What he found was exactly what the humans had promised, a research facility designed to understand how he functioned. "You are not afraid," he observed. "Should we be?" Chen asked. "I am a champion of the Caliph Empire. I have destroyed worlds. I have ended civilizations." "Yes, we figured that out from the energy readings," Chen replied calmly. "Very impressive bioengineering, by the way. Whoever designed your quantum stabilization matrix knew what they were doing." For the first time in his existence, Champion Korath felt something approaching confusion. "You understand my construction?" "Parts of it. The quantum coherence maintenance is particularly elegant. We're still working out how your gravitational field generation interfaces with your nervous system, but we've got some promising theories." Korath stepped fully into the chamber, and the facility sealed around him with the gentle precision of a closing hand. Sensors activated throughout the structure, beginning the most comprehensive analysis of a living being in human history. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "We want to understand how you work," Chun said simply. "Every system can be understood, every technology can be analyzed, and every problem can be solved. You're just a very interesting problem. And once you understand me, then we'll know how to fix you. Fix me. Karatha's voice carried a note of surprise. I'm not malfunctioning. Aren't you? Chen asked gently. You're a living being who's been modified into a weapon. Your entire existence is dedicated to destruction and conquest. Don't you think that's something that could use some repair work? For the first time in 3 centuries, Champion Karath found himself considering a question that had never occurred to him. What if there was more to existence than being an instrument of imperial will? The analysis began immediately. Sensors mapped every aspect of his bioengineered form while he remained motionless in the center of the chamber, processing the unprecedented experience of being treated as a patient rather than a threat. Fascinating, Dr. Patterson was saying as streams of data flowed across his monitors. The quantum stabilization matrix isn't just maintaining exotic matter states. It's actively suppressing certain neural pathways while enhancing others. Suppressing what? Chen asked. Empathy centers, creative thinking, abstract reasoning. The enhancement process didn't just make him stronger and faster. It made him less capable of considering alternatives to violence. Can it be reversed? Maybe. But we need to understand the base template first. What was he like before the modifications? Chen turned to address Karath directly. Can you remember what you were like before you became a champion? The question hit Karath like a physical blow. Memory fragments flickered through his consciousness, fragments that the enhancement process had buried, but not entirely destroyed. Images of a younger self, a being capable of wonder and doubt, and questions that went beyond tactical analysis. I was different, he said quietly. We can help you be different again, Chen offered, if that's what you want. The conversation was interrupted by alarms sounding throughout the facility. Colonel Martinez's voice crackled through the communication system. Ma'am, we've got company. Imperial ships are moving into attack positions. Chen sighed. Well, that was faster than expected. How long before they open fire? Unknown, but they're powering weapons systems. Right. Chen turned back to Karath. Looks like we're about to find out whether your people value their champions enough to risk them in a direct assault. Champion Karath accessed his internal communication system to contact Admiral Zephyros. Command, the humans are not hostile. They are attempting to provide medical assistance. Medical assistance? They believe the enhancement process that created me can be modified or reversed. They are offering to help me recover suppressed aspects of my original personality. The silence that followed was longer than any previous pause in their communications. Champion Karath, Admiral Zephyros finally said, his voice carrying a tone Karath had never heard before. You will withdraw from that facility immediately and proceed with standard pacification protocols. Admiral, these beings may represent an opportunity for... That is an order, Champion. Karath looked around the chamber where human scientists were working frantically to understand technologies that could reshape the galaxy. He thought about the question Chen had asked him about alternatives to violence. He considered, for the first time in 3 centuries, the possibility that there might be more than one way to solve a problem. Admiral, he said quietly, I respectfully decline. The silence that followed was the sound of 3,000 years of imperial doctrine cracking like overstressed metal. The bridge of the eternal glory had fallen into a silence so complete that the ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed to roar like thunder. Admiral Zephyros stood frozen before the tactical display, staring at the data streams coming from Champion Karatha's position with the expression of someone watching the fundamental laws of physics rewrite themselves in real time. Admiral, Captain Vex spoke carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. Champion Karath has just refused a direct order. I heard him. In 3,000 years of imperial expansion, no champion has ever refused an order. I'm aware of that, Captain. What are your instructions? Zephyros continued staring at the display, where the readings from Earth's surface showed something that should have been impossible. Champion Karatha's biosignatures indicated that he was not only alive and uninjured, but that his stress levels had actually decreased since entering the human facility. The living weapon designed to be incapable of anything but obedience and aggression was apparently relaxed. Admiral, Captain Vex prompted. I don't know, Zephyros admitted, speaking the three words that no Imperial Admiral had uttered in recorded history. On Earth's surface, the revelation that Champion Karath had just committed the first act of insubordination in 3 millennia of Imperial military history was temporarily overshadowed by more immediate concerns. Ma'am, Colonel Martinez called out urgently. The alien fleet is moving to attack formation. We've got multiple targeting locks from orbital positions. Sarah Chang glanced at the tactical display, showing the Imperial ships arranging themselves for what was clearly intended to be a devastating bombardment. Time until they open fire? Best guess? 10 minutes, maybe less. Right. Chun turned to address the entire facility. People, we just became ground zero for what might be the first interstellar war in human history. The good news is we've got the most advanced alien technology expert in the known universe right here with us. She looked directly at Champion Karath, who was still standing in the center of the analysis chamber, surrounded by scanning equipment and monitoring systems. The question is whether our new friend here is willing to help us figure out how to not get blown into constituent atoms. Karath's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display with the intensity of someone seeing his entire worldview collapse and rebuild itself in real time. Admiral Zephyros will not fire while I am in this facility. You sure about that? Champions are irreplaceable resources. The Empire has never sacrificed a champion to achieve a strategic objective. Never, Dr. Patterson asked. Not once in 3,000 years. Then, we've got a standoff, Chen observed. They won't attack while you're here, and we're not letting you leave until we figure out how to keep them from turning our planet into a parking lot. There's another option, Karath said quietly. I'm listening. The other 11 champions deployed to this planet. They are receiving the same data transmissions I am sending to the fleet. They are hearing our conversations. Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. They're learning what you're learning. The enhancement process that created us suppressed certain capabilities, but it did not eliminate them entirely. If the other champions are exposed to the same concepts you have presented to me, they may begin to question their conditioning as I have. And if they do, then Admiral Zephyros will face a situation no Imperial commander has ever encountered. Multiple champions acting independently. Chun grinned with the expression of someone who had just realized that the most complex engineering problem of her career might actually have a solution. Dr. Patterson, how quickly can we establish communication links with the other facilities? Give me 20 minutes. Colonel Martinez, can you coordinate with the other sites to make sure they understand what we're dealing with? Already on it, ma'am. Outstanding. Shin turned back to Karath. Now, let's talk about what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object, and both sides decide to have a conversation instead of a fight. Across the globe, similar scenes were playing out at 11 other locations. In each facility, human engineers and scientists were working alongside bewildered champions who were experiencing independent thought for the first time in centuries. The conversations being shared through the Champions Communication Network were spreading like a virus of curiosity through minds that had been designed to never question anything. Champion Vextar, standing in the analysis facility that had been built around him in the Sahara Desert, listened to Karath's voice describing concepts that seemed to bypass every psychological barrier the enhancement process had installed. You are saying that the humans believe we can be repaired. They believe we can be restored to what we were before the modifications, Karath confirmed. They view our current state as a form of technological injury that can be healed. Champion Drachnos, surrounded by equipment in the Siberian facility, felt something stirring in neural pathways that hadn't been active for 3 centuries. But we are weapons. We are instruments of Imperial will. That is our purpose. Is it? Asked Champion Lasara from her facility in the Australian outback. Or is that simply what we were told our purpose was? The philosophical discussion spreading through the Champions Network was being monitored with growing alarm on the bridge of the eternal glory. Admiral Zephyros watched the biometric data from all 12 champions showing identical patterns. Decreased aggression markers, increased activity in regions of the brain associated with abstract reasoning, and elevated levels of what could only be described as curiosity. Captain Vex, he said finally, in your assessment, what is the likelihood that we can recover control of the champions? Unknown, Admiral. The psychological conditioning that maintains their obedience appears to be degrading in real time. How is that possible? The humans are treating them as patients rather than weapons. They're addressing the champions as individuals with personal agency rather than as instruments of imperial policy. The conditioning wasn't designed to withstand that kind of interaction. Zephyros considered his options, all of which range from bad to catastrophic. He could order a bombardment that would destroy the human facilities along with the champions inside them. But losing 12 irreplaceable bioweapons would be a strategic disaster that would take centuries to recover from. He could attempt a ground assault, but the champion's presence made that tactically impossible. Or he could attempt to negotiate, which would be admitting that a primitive species had somehow achieved strategic parity with the Empire. Admiral, came Champion Karatha's voice through the communication system. I believe we need to discuss the current situation. Champions do not initiate strategic discussions, Zephyros replied automatically. Perhaps that should change. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental order of imperial society. For 3,000 years, the Empire had maintained its dominance through the absolute obedience of its champions. The idea that the living weapons might develop opinions about strategy was as unthinkable as the idea that starships might decide where they wanted to fly. What did you say? I said perhaps the strategic doctrine should be modified to allow for input from champions. We possess unique perspectives on combat scenarios and enemy capabilities that could be valuable for command decision-making. Captain Vex stared at Admiral Zephyros with the expression of someone watching their commanding officer receive tactical advice from a siege engine. Sir, how do you want to respond to that? I honestly have no idea. Back on Earth, the global network of human facilities had become something unprecedented in the history of either species. A collaborative research project between former enemies focused on solving problems rather than creating them. The modifications to their neural architecture are incredibly sophisticated. Dr. Patterson was explaining to colleagues at the other sites through the quantum communication network they had established. But they're not permanent. Think of it like software that's been installed over the original operating system. We can't remove it safely, but we might be able to run both programs simultaneously. You're talking about giving them access to their original personalities while maintaining their enhanced capabilities? Asked Dr. Yamamoto from the Tokyo facility. Exactly. Instead of trying to undo 3 centuries of bioengineering, we help them integrate their suppressed characteristics with their current abilities. The psychological implications are staggering, added Dr. Petrov from the Moscow site. We're potentially looking at creating entirely new forms of consciousness. Sarah Chun, coordinating the global effort from Nevada, felt the familiar excitement that came with solving impossible problems. The question is whether they want to try it. This has to be their choice. She turned to Champion Karath, who had been listening to the scientific discussion with the focused attention of someone encountering concepts that challenged everything he had believed about himself. Well, she asked, are you interested in finding out who you used to be? Karath was quiet for a long moment, processing questions that his enhanced neural architecture had been designed to never ask. If the procedure is successful, I will no longer be a perfect weapon. No, you'll be something more interesting. You'll be a person who happens to be incredibly capable. And if the Empire considers this a form of defection, then we'll deal with that problem when we come to it, Chun said simply. One impossible thing at a time. Karath looked around the facility where humans had spent less than a day building technology specifically designed to help him reclaim parts of himself that had been lost for centuries. He thought about Admiral Zephyros, waiting in orbit with enough firepower to sterilize the planet. He considered the other champions, all facing the same choice he was being offered. There is something you should know, he said finally. The Empire's conquest strategy depends entirely on the psychological impact of champion deployments. We are not just weapons, we are symbols. If we cease to function as symbols of imperial power, the whole system starts to fall apart. Chen finished. Yeah, we figured that out. The question is whether you're okay with that. I have been an instrument of conquest for 300 years, Karath said quietly. I think I would like to try being something else. Then, let's get started. As the procedure began, Champion Karath's voice carried across the communication network to his 11 counterparts around the globe. I am attempting the integration process. If successful, I will be able to access suppressed memories and capabilities while maintaining enhanced physical abilities. And if unsuccessful, ask Champion Drachnos. Then, I will learn something about the limits of human engineering capabilities. That is not particularly reassuring, observed Champion Lasara. No, Karath agreed, but it is interesting. The word interesting rippled through the champion's network like a stone dropped in still water. For beings who had been conditioned to evaluate everything in terms of tactical advantage or strategic value, the concept of doing something simply because it was intellectually engaging was revolutionary. One by one, the other champions made their decisions. One by one, they chose to be interesting rather than perfect weapons. And, on the bridge of the eternal glory, Admiral Zephyros watched the biometric readings that represented 3,000 years of imperial doctrine transforming into something entirely unprecedented. Captain Vex, he said slowly, I believe we may need to consider the possibility that we are no longer fighting a war. What are we doing then, sir? I think, Zephyros said, staring at the data streams, showing 12 champions voluntarily undergoing procedures designed to make them less effective as weapons. We might be participating in the most complex diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. Sir, the humans aren't trying to defeat us, Captain. They're trying to fix us. 6 months after the day that would later be remembered as the Great Standoff, the solar system had become the strangest diplomatic zone in galactic history. The Imperial fleet remained in orbit around Earth, but their weapons had been powered down for months. Instead of preparing for conquest, they had become reluctant participants in what could only be described as the largest collaborative engineering project ever attempted. The transformation had begun with Champion Karath's successful neural integration procedure. When the process had restored his access to suppressed memories and capabilities without diminishing his enhanced abilities, the psychological impact had rippled through the entire Imperial military structure. Within hours, all 12 champions had requested similar procedures. Within days, they were experiencing emotions and thoughts that had been absent for centuries. Within weeks, they were asking questions that no one in the Empire had prepared to answer. Admiral, Champion Karath's voice carried through the communication system on the bridge of the eternal glory, but the tone was unlike anything Admiral Zephyros had heard from a champion in his 50 years of command. Where there had once been mechanical obedience, there was now something that could only be described as conversational warmth. We need to discuss the situation on the planet's surface. Report, Zephyros replied, though the word felt inadequate for what had become an ongoing dialogue rather than a traditional military briefing. The human engineers have made a breakthrough in understanding our enhancement technology. They believe they can apply similar principles to improve their own capabilities without the psychological modifications that were imposed on us. They want to enhance themselves? Not exactly. They want to fix what they see as design flaws in the enhancement process. They believe it's possible to create beings with our physical capabilities, but without the constraints that made us into weapons rather than people. Admiral Zephyros found himself once again facing concepts that had no precedent in Imperial doctrine. And you support this approach? Admiral, I have recovered memories from before my enhancement. I remember being curious about the universe, interested in creation rather than destruction, capable of forming relationships based on mutual respect rather than dominance hierarchies. The humans haven't diminished my capabilities. They've given me back parts of myself that the Empire took away. There was a pause as Zephyros processed this information. Champion Karath, are you saying that you were... happier before your enhancement? I'm saying I was more complete. The conversation was interrupted by Captain Vex approaching with a datapad that contained reports from across the Imperial fleet. Admiral, we're receiving requests from 37% of our personnel asking for permission to visit the planet's surface. Requests for what purpose? They want to see what the humans are doing with our champions. Zephyros studied the data pad with growing bewilderment. The psychological profiles of his crew were showing patterns he had never seen before. Elevated curiosity markers, increased interest in non-military activities, and what could only be described as enthusiasm for problem-solving rather than problem elimination. Captain, in your assessment, what is happening to our personnel? They're learning, Admiral. The champions' reports about their experiences with the humans are being distributed throughout the fleet. Our people are discovering that there might be alternatives to conquest as a method of interacting with other species. Alternatives such as cooperation, trade, mutual assistance. The humans have introduced concepts that our personnel find intriguing. Down on Earth's surface, the facilities that had been hastily constructed to analyze champions had evolved into something resembling a cross between research laboratories and cultural exchange centers. The global network of sites had become meeting places where humans and Imperial personnel worked together on projects that neither species could have imagined 6 months earlier. The gravitational field generators could revolutionize our transportation systems. Dr. Patterson was explaining to a group that included both human engineers and Caliph technicians who had been granted permission to visit from the fleet. But we need to solve the power consumption issues first. Have you considered using quantum resonance cascades to amplify the field efficiency? Asked Engineer Vextal, a Caliph specialist who had spent the past month learning human problem-solving methodologies. We tried that, but we couldn't get stable resonance patterns with our current technology. What if we combined human computational systems with Caliph bioneural processing? The hybrid approach might provide the stability you need. Sarah Chun, observing the discussion from across the laboratory, felt the satisfaction that came from watching impossible problems become merely complex ones. The collaboration between human and Caliph engineers had produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Ma'am, Colonel Martinez approached with a communication device. We're getting a transmission from Admiral Zephyros. He's requesting a direct meeting. Chun raised an eyebrow. A meeting? Not a surrender demand or ultimatum. He specifically used the word meeting. Said he wanted to discuss mutual interests. Interesting. What does he want to meet? He's asking permission to come to the surface. The meeting took place in the Nevada facility in a conference room that had been hastily modified to accommodate both human and Caliph physiology. Admiral Zephyros, accompanied by Champion Karath and a small diplomatic party, sat across from Sarah Chun and a team of human representatives in what was arguably the most unprecedented diplomatic gathering in galactic history. Master Chief Chun, Admiral Zephyros began, his 4 arms arranged in what Chun had learned was a gesture of respectful attention. I find myself in a situation that has no precedent in Imperial military doctrine. Which situation is that, Admiral? I am commanding a conquest fleet that no longer wishes to conquer anything. Chun nodded thoughtfully. That does seem like it would create some operational challenges. My personnel are requesting permission to collaborate with your people on research projects. My champions have become more interested in problem-solving than in demonstrating Imperial power. And I am beginning to question whether our traditional approach to interspecies relations might be inefficient. Inefficient how? Conquest requires enormous resources, creates ongoing resistance, and produces societies that contribute nothing to galactic civilization except tribute. Your approach of cooperation appears to generate innovations and discoveries that benefit everyone involved. Champion Korath leaned forward slightly. Admiral, the human engineers have helped me understand that the enhancement process didn't just modify our bodies, it limited our thinking. They've shown me that there are more ways to solve problems than simply destroying them. And their methods work? Admiral, In 6 months, the collaboration between human and Caliph personnel has produced advances in 17 different scientific disciplines. We've developed new technologies, new approaches to resource management, and new models for interspecies cooperation. The efficiency gains are remarkable. Admiral Zephyros was quiet for a long moment, processing information that challenged 3,000 years of imperial policy. Master Chief Chun, what exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, Admiral. I'm just fixing things that seem to be broken. Such as, well, your champions were suffering from artificially imposed psychological limitations. We helped fix that. Your conquest strategy was creating unnecessary conflict and waste. We're developing alternatives to that. Your fleet personnel are experiencing curiosity about collaborative research, so we're creating opportunities for that. You see our entire civilization as a series of engineering problems to be solved. Chin smiled. Everything's an engineering problem if you approach it right. The question is whether you want to keep using a broken system or whether you'd like to try some upgrades. What kind of upgrades? How about we start with the concept that strength doesn't have to equal isolation? Your empire built itself on the idea that the strongest force wins every conflict. But what if the strongest force was actually cooperation between multiple parties working toward mutual benefit? Admiral Zephyros considered this question while watching Champion Karath, who had become living proof that strength and cooperation were not mutually exclusive concepts. The champion was still capable of feats that bordered on the impossible, but he was using those capabilities to help solve scientific problems rather than to intimidate potential enemies. The political implications of such a change would be enormous, Zephyros said finally. Yeah, probably Chin agreed, but the engineering implications are fascinating. Imagine what your people could accomplish if their energy wasn't devoted to conquest and control. Imagine what innovations might emerge from collaboration between species with different approaches to problem solving. And if the Empire refuses to accept such changes, then you'll have to decide whether you're loyal to an institution or to the people that institution is supposed to serve. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Patterson approaching with a datapad containing information that made him grin like someone who had just won the scientific lottery. Sarah, you need to see this. What is it? The latest results from the Collaborative Research Project. The combination of human computational theory and Caliph bioneural engineering. We just solved faster-than-light communication. Solve it how? We can now maintain real-time communication across galactic distances using quantum-entangled bioneural networks. The implications are staggering. Instead of conquest fleets having to operate in isolation, different species could maintain constant collaboration on research projects regardless of physical distance. Admiral Zephyros stared at the datapad with the expression of someone watching the fundamental assumptions of interstellar civilization rewrite themselves. You've eliminated the communication delays that make galactic governance so difficult. We've done more than that, Chun said, studying the technical specifications. We've created the infrastructure for true galactic collaboration. Species don't have to choose between isolation and conquest anymore. They can choose cooperation instead. The Empire will never accept such a radical change. Then, maybe it's time for a new empire, suggested Champion Karath. One built on cooperation rather than conquest. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of 3,000 years of political doctrine cracking like overstressed metal. But, unlike the destructive failure of a broken system, this was the controlled demolition that preceded new construction. Master Chief Chun, Admiral Zephyros said finally, I believe my people would like to learn more about your engineering methods. We'd be happy to teach you. But, fair warning, once you start thinking like an engineer, you start seeing everything as something that can be improved, including things that other people think are working just fine. Is that a problem? Only if you're attached to the status quo. Admiral Zephyros looked around the conference room, where humans and Caliph personnel were working together on problems that neither species could have solved alone. He thought about the reports from across his fleet describing personnel who were more excited about collaborative research than they had ever been about conquest. He considered the champions who had traded mechanical obedience for the ability to think independently and had become more effective than ever before. I think, he said slowly, the Caliph Empire might be ready for some upgrades. Chen grinned. Excellent. Fair warning, though. Once we start fixing things, we tend to be pretty thorough. Is that a threat? It's a promise. By the time we're done, you're going to have the most efficient, most innovative, most cooperative civilization in galactic history. And if we don't want those improvements, then you'll have learned something about the limits of engineering, Chun said with a shrug. But I've been fixing impossible things for 20 years, and I'm not about to let the first galactic empire break my streak. 1 year later, the entity that had once been the Caliph Empire had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary association of species working together on problems that benefited everyone involved. The champions had become roving troubleshooters, using their enhanced capabilities to implement solutions developed through collaborative research. The conquest fleets had been converted into mobile research platforms, spreading innovations and cooperative technologies throughout the galaxy. And at the center of it all, Master Chief Engineer Sarah Chun continued doing what she had always done, finding things that were broken and figuring out how to make them work better. Ma'am, Colonel Martinez approached with the latest reports from the collaborative research initiatives that now span 17 different star systems. We're getting requests from 43 different species asking for engineering consultation services. Problems or opportunities? Both. Mostly people who've heard about what we accomplished here and want to know if we can help them solve problems they thought were impossible. Chun smiled with the expression of someone who had just realized that her toolbox had gotten a lot bigger. Well, Colonel, looks like we're going to need more wrenches. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting a very long time for someone to approach its problems with curiosity instead of conquest. And once that approach started spreading, it became impossible to stop. After all, everything was fixable if you had the right tools and enough determination. Even empires,